What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. It's Sunday, so time to take a look at another optimal underdog draft strategy. This week, we're taking a look at Extreme Bully Tight End. It's a really fun strategy to implement, and while there are absolutely ways that it can fail, this build opens up some paths to like truly elite seasons, while also increasing your advancement rate and your chance of winning it all more than the simulations suggest. So this week is much more about strategy and game theory than it is being mathematically optimal. So again, I think it's a really fun one. Sit back, hit the like button, and let's start talking about Extreme Bully Tight End. As the name suggests, we are attacking tight end very early in the draft, taking all of the top 3. However, we're not going to reach to make this happen. I'm talking all these strategy videos about how we want to make sure when we're implementing a strategy that we're doing so at value. We talk about so many different strategies so that no matter how you start, you can kind of go down one path. If running back becomes a value, you do this. If wide receiver becomes a value, you do this. Well, if tight end is becoming a value, this is what you should be doing. And it's extra important this week because there are only so many, right? If you want to implement the strategy, you have to take Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, and TJ Hawkinson. That is your only options. You don't have other tight ends you can take in round 1 besides Travis Kelce, right? That's your only option. So when we're doing it, we got to make sure we're not reaching. I would want to get all 3 to value, although with Kelce in the first round, whether you take him at 5, 6, 7, 8, that's not hugely important. I would say it's much more important that we're getting Andrews and Hawkinson at a value. So first step, we're taking Travis Kelce in the mid to late first round. It would be great, right? If you took a running back or wide receiver in round 1 and then Travis Kelce happened to be there in round 2, it's not going to happen. It would be great, but I suppose you could do this build if that were to happen to you. I have not ever seen Travis Kelce make it to round 2 this season, but again, if it happens, sure. But you're taking him in round 1. Then in round 2, I would personally suggest a running back. We're going to need to implement Hero RB in this build, and so your goal is to draft a running back in round 2. You think can be a league winner. I took in this build Jonathan Taylor, 18th overall, but any of Nick Chubb, Jonathan Taylor, and Saquon will work here. Those are the running backs that are typically available in the middle of the second round. Many of the other ones, we'll say Austin Eckler, Bijan Robinson, they're typically gone at the end of round 1. So when we're in the middle of the second round, those 3 are what we're looking at. Tony Pollard is an option, but given how ADPs work out, he goes closer to picks like 22, 23, and he doesn't usually fall into the mid 3rd round. However, if you wanted to go with a wide receiver in round 2, hoping you could get Tony Pollard in round 3, I'm totally fine doing that. Just know it's pretty unlikely that will happen. But he's another running back I would be fine doing Hero RB with. Again, you got to do Hero RB with this. And so my goal would be to say, okay, which one of Chubb, Taylor, or Saquon has fallen to with this pick? Take that one. I just think it's the better route to go down. In round 3, you're going to want to take Mark Andrews, but I recommend waiting. Yes, he is technically a value. He would have technically been a value at my pick here, right? I have the 7th overall pick, so my 3rd round pick is at 31 overall. ADP at the time of drafting this team, Mark Andrews was pick 30. I think right now he's like pick 28 or 29. But by taking him there, you're pushing that first wide receiver back until at least round 4 and potentially even round 5. And since our goal is to draft 3 tight ends, that means we can't take 10 wide receivers, right? Under a 2, 4, 10, 2 build, we can take those 10 wide receivers if we pushed it back a little bit. Having a total of 10 can kind of make up for taking our first one a little bit later. The best we can do here is 9, and what I'm actually going to show you is one that has only 8. And so by pushing wide receiver later and later, we're just guaranteeing we're going to be weaker at the wide receiver position, which is not what we want to do. We still want to exit this build feeling really strong at all positions, just with dominant tight end play. And so I really would not take Mark Andrews in round 3, Only implement this if you can get a really good value. And also, what targeting wide receiver does here is it opens up pretty much any other build, right? If you start off tight end, running back, wide receiver. Well, that's a very common start with a mid first round pick. And so the worst case scenario here is that Mark Andrews just doesn't become a value in round 4. Someone ends up taking him, in like the late 3rd round, maybe the early 4th round before our pick is up. And, we just end up taking the best available player in round 4. So not exactly the end of the world if we were like, okay, let's go for it. Andrews comes off the board, and now we start off like, Kelsey, Jonathan Taylor, Deebo Samuel, and whoever you feel like taking in round 4. That's still a very strong start. So it's not like we started down a path that we can't finish with a really good team. We can still get a phenomenal team with that start, but if Mark Andrews does fall, now we open up this build type. So in my draft, that's how things started off. I got Kelsey in round 1, then I took Jonathan Taylor, then Deebo Samuel, and then I got Mark Andrews to fall to me in round 4. Now, most everyone will stop here. They will not take that 3rd tight end, and if they do, they'll take one late, which would make absolutely no sense. That wouldn't help you out at all. And to be honest, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be at this spot and be like, okay, I've got my 2 tight ends. Like, I'm obviously not taking another one. Let's just load out wide receiver, running back. Let's just build a really, really strong team. And so I tweeted out my team and I asked, okay, because Hawkinson did fall to me. We're at pick 55. I'm like, okay, well, Hawkinson's a really good value. You guys know I love Hawkinson this season. What should I do? I tweeted that out. 65% of you said take Mixon instead of Hawkinson. So 35% of you obviously said take TJ Hawkinson. And Mixon very likely is the correct answer if you're trying to maximize your point. You run that through a simulation, I can guarantee you it says take Joe Mixon. You're going to score more points on average. But it's not going to be like a significant difference. Actually, I ran this through the simulations. It comes out as like not suboptimal. It actually comes out as like a relatively average build. It doesn't come out optimal, but I was expecting to see like less than 1,500 points for the full season. I was expecting it to be like, no, this does not work out. You avoided these positions too much. It actually wasn't terrible. So on average, this is not something where it's like, oh, you can't possibly win. But where it comes out, like I said at the beginning, is this is a game theory play. This is a strategy play. This is a play where we are trying to win $3 million. We are trying to beat out 600,000 other teams. There will be at most a handful of teams that are able to draft these top 3 tight ends in these 3 rounds, meaning they got Mark Andrews in round 4 and Hawkinson fell to them in round 5. There will only be a handful of teams that are able to do that, maybe more now that I'm making this video. But at the time, I was thinking, who's going to get this? Like, very few people are going to do this. So out of over 600,000 teams, I have a build that very few people will be able to replicate, and I've gotten all 3 at value. Now, unfortunately, just saying that you got something at value or just saying, oh, I've got a build no one else will have, that's not enough, right? There has to be a path to it working out. And I see 2 paths with this build type. Number 1, maybe all 3 of these tight ends dominate. Maybe all of them go over 1,000 yards. All of them score, double-digit touchdowns, and that the 4th place tight end doesn't really come all that close. Kittle doesn't have a great year. Waller gets injured. Pitts doesn't break out. And we're looking at the tight end 4 like there is a huge gap between 3 and 4. Well, now I'm probably going to advance. If that ends up happening, I'm definitely going to get 1st or 2nd place on my specific league for weeks 1 through 14 because I am crushing the tight end position every single week. Plus, many times, Kelsey's going to have maybe 100 yards and a touchdown, and that just ends up in my flex spot, making up for the fact that I can't take wide receiver so early, and maybe I can't dominate the running back position. I have to do hero RB, and so the flex would have been weaker, but now I have extra positions I can play in that flex spot. And so when I look at every other team I'm going against, well, if there's that big gap and there isn't that fourth tight end, if I'm crushing tight end every week and everyone else is trying to scrap together like 8 or 9 points and I consistently am dropping 20 or 25, that is a huge edge that I'm gaining and no one else can make it up because I've got all the ones that went off. Then if I advance, here's the thing. I'm going to be going up against a ton of teams that have Kelsey, Mark Andrews, and Hawkinson. But I am, again, not going to be going up against many teams that have all three, very few that have two of them. Although if they all go off, there'll be a few teams that have two, but again, not many will have three. And so maybe Travis Kelsey drops 30 points in week 15. That helps me advance, but the Kelsey teams also advanced. Many of them, many teams had Kelsey. And so I get into week 15. There's a huge ratio of teams that have Travis Kelsey, but now a much, much, much smaller ratio of teams that have Mark Andrews, that have Hawkinson. Because if Kelsey went off and so few teams got 2 or 3 of them, well, not many teams are going to have them because it's like if you drafted, Hawkinson as your only tight end, Kelsey goes off in week 15. You don't have Kelsey, you have Hawkinson. Hawkinson doesn't go off. You're probably not going to advance, right? And so many teams don't have Andrews and Hawkinson. Well, now what happens if in week 16, well, now Mark Andrews drops 30 points. Well, since very few teams drafted Kelsey and Andrews, so, Andrews has a very low advancement rate, I'm pretty easily able to make it into week 17 because I'm not going up against very many Mark Andrews teams. And then the real benefit happens. What if then Hawkinson scores 30 points in week 17? Now I'm going up against virtually no one. Kelsey teams advanced, Andrews teams advanced. TJ Hawkinson would have almost no ownership in week 17, and now he's a tight end capable of 30 points at no ownership in week 17, and I've won $3 million. That's the path, right? It's unlikely, right? But think about how unlikely it is that you're going to beat out 600,000 teams not taking some sort of game theory into account. That's out number one. Out number two is a bit unconventional, and if it happens to you initially, you're going to be very upset, right? Because you're thinking, I have these three. I want all three to dominate for the entire season. But what you actually might want to happen is that one of them suffers a pretty major injury that knocks them out for virtually the entire season, but that they're able to return over the few final weeks and then they dominate. So let's say Travis Kelsey suffers a high ankle sprain in week 3. He misses the rest of week 3, weeks 4 through 13, returns in week 14. In that scenario, teams that drafted Travis Kelsey in the first round will have a very difficult time advancing. And that means that Kelsey would come at extremely low ownership in weeks 15 through 17. But on my build, I do still have Mark Andrews and TJ Hawkinson. And while I would obviously take a hit in my scoring not having Travis Kelsey, I might still be able to advance if Andrews and Hawkinson both have elite seasons, because the same thing would end up being true. What if that tight end 4 doesn't really compete with, or I guess it'd be a tight end 3 at this point, doesn't really compete with Andrews or Hawkinson? They have phenomenal seasons. They're up at like 1,200 yards, 12 touchdowns. They're dominating my tight end position. I'm crushing everyone there, and they're still rotating into the flex, and I can squeak in to second place and advance. Well, now we have 3 one-week seasons, right? Week 15, 16, 17. I just need to win in those weeks. And if Kelsey returns, maybe Kansas City is in win now mode because they haven't had Travis Kelsey all season. They didn't perform as well. They're in a difficult division. They have to win towards the end of the year. And now they just start hyper-focusing on Travis Kelsey in these weeks. Well, now there's a very obvious out, and that is, what if Kelsey is just the one that ends up scoring 25, 30 points per game in weeks 15 through 17, and the tight end position is kind of a wasteland in those weeks, which it is sometimes. There are plenty of weeks where tight ends just don't go off. The highest scoring tight end has like 15. Well, if that happens and Kelsey drops 30 And no one has him because he's been injured the whole season, but I was able to advance because I have 2 other elite tight ends. Now I might also win $3 million that way. So I'm not saying either of these things are like likely to happen, right? They're not the most likely outcome. The most likely outcome is that they all have pretty decent seasons and I have a good team, but not an amazing team. But let's face it, beating 600,000 teams is not easy to do. You need to get lucky to beat that many teams. And so by doing something that's extremely unique and telling a story as to how it can work out, you're absolutely increasing the chance that you're able to pull it off compared to someone who's just like, oh, I'm just going to draft the best player available. I think I can beat 600,000 other teams just based off my knowledge of who's going to break out being better than everyone else. I know we're all confident in our abilities sometimes to evaluate players, but we need to be real with ourselves. We're not player evaluation gods, right? And even if we were, there's 600,000 other teams. Like, there is likely other teams with very, very similar players as you, but they got them at slightly better values. But how many teams took Kelsey, Andrews, and Hawkinson? Probably not that many. And if others did, I can guarantee you the vast majority of them did so in round 3 for Andrews and not in the 4th round. And so if this build proves to work out, then we're competing with far fewer teams for that $3 million first prize. So that's my rationale for the strategy. Here's how I finished off the draft. We only have 1 wide receiver through round 5, so we're absolutely going to need to attack that position now. I took JSN in round 6, Brandon Cooks in round 7. Both are on offenses that I trust. Both are players that I believe strongly in their talents, and I think they can greatly outperform their ADPs. I would want to be doing that in this build. I would not ever want to take a player I think, will return value but won't crush their ADP. I think both JSN and Brandon Cooks can crush their ADPs. In rounds 8 and 9, I knew I wanted high-end quarterback play. Like, we're obviously going to crush the tight end position. I think we can do well at running back and wide receiver. But I didn't want to push off quarterback too late because, well, then I'm just getting crushed at the quarterback position. And so it kind of offsets having really good tight ends. Like, I'm beating people there, they're beating me somewhere else, and now we're all kind of even. I wanted there to be a path to where maybe the 2 quarterbacks I take both finish top 5, and now I'm crushing both quarterback and tight end, right? And so I take Deshaun Watson, I take Dak Prescott in these 2 rounds. Dak Prescott, an obvious stack with Brandon Cooks. And then I was pretty sure I'd get DPJ later on with Watson. DPJ also, a big play threat and someone who, if we're right, if Cleveland is throwing the ball at a high rate, playing, a ton of 5 wide sets, using 3 wide receivers at a very high rate, well, he's going to shatter his ADP as well. In the next 3 rounds, I went with 3 players that I've listed as breakouts in recent weeks: Sky Moore, Khalil Herbert, and Jalen Warren. Then the rest of the draft was really just about finishing off a 2-5-8-3 build. So 2 quarterbacks, 5 running backs, 8 wide receivers, and our 3 tight ends. I would be fine if you wanted to do 6 running backs and 7 wide receivers, since again, one of the paths that's working out is that the tight ends do really well. They're rotating into your flex spot a little bit more often, so maybe you don't need as many wide receivers. I considered that, but I just didn't see a single running back that I wanted in round 17. I didn't feel like just forcing someone I didn't want on the team. Also, I like taking Hyatt this late. You guys know I'm not even a believer in Hyatt's talent. I don't even think he's like that amazing of a player. I probably would never draft him in a redraft league, and I don't know that he's going to do anything this season. But if he ever hits, he is a big play threat. He's a home run threat. And he's someone who could hit for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns twice this season. And if that happens in weeks 15, 16, 17, I'm going to want that on my team, especially if it only costs me, pick 200 in the draft, a mid 17th round pick. Someone who's capable of that, I just want to gain exposure to. I thought that was a really good pick. So the final team is Deshaun Watson and Dak Prescott at quarterback, Jonathan Taylor, Khalil Herbert, Jalen Warren, Zeke, and Gus Edwards at running back, Debo, JSN, Brandon Cooks, Sky Moore, Thielen, Mims, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and then Jalen Hyatt at wide receiver, and then Kelsey, Andrews, Hawkinson all at tight end. So If you want to test out the strategy, or if you want to draft against me because you think that this build couldn't possibly work out, or you just want access to a bunch of free content, and sign up for your first Underdog account today using promo code FFA. Once you do that, you'll get my rankings for free, Underdog strategy articles for free, Underdog strategy app for free, and your initial deposit will be doubled up to $100. It is a fantastic deal, the best one you'll find in the industry, so please take advantage. Also, if you have any questions about the strategy or really just anything fantasy related, put it in the comment section below. I'll try to answer some of those. But also, you can ask me in our free Discord. There's a link to that in the description of every single video. Completely free to join that. You can tag me in any questions you want, and I'll try to answer all of those as well. I'll be back tomorrow with another episode of Mock Draft Monday, live Tuesday night, 6:30 Eastern, to answer any questions you all have and do a draft with all of you. And then Wednesday to go over optimal draft strategy in redraft leagues with a late first round pick. But that, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting the like button and how about subscribing to the channel if you're new here. Thanks for watching.